Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Wednesday's edition of Carry On, brought to you by Nation's Finest, where our mission is to support America's military veterans and their families with a comprehensive approach to housing, health, and employment that helps them to achieve self-sufficiency and reach their full potential. If you or a veteran you know needs help, or if you'd like to make a donation, please visit nationsfinest.org or call 833-468-9676. Again, that's nationsfinest.org or call 833-468-9676. I'm your host, Mark Miller, Army veteran and Communications Director for Nation's Finest. Today, Stephen Miller is here to talk with us about navigating employment options as a veteran. Stephen retired from the Army in 2017 after 23 years of service, both in enlisted and commissioned officer capacities. He was a field artillery officer and later transferred to public affairs. After leaving the Army, he worked in higher education for 3.5 years and now works for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Stephen Miller, thank you so much for joining us today on the program.
Happy to be here.
Well, I wanted to start off talking about, this is Veterans Employment Month. The 25th is actually Hire a Veteran Day. So we're talking about veteran employment this month, finding employment, finding the right employment. So the first question I've got for you is actually a question that I divulged some personal information here myself. Stephen retired about 1 year ahead of me, and we did very similar jobs in the Army. And even though Stephen and I had never met in person, and we know each other pretty well, we still haven't met in person to this day. We should probably fix that sometime soon here, Stephen. But I reached out to him and said, hey, our resumes look a lot alike. All these Army classes about how to do a resume and how to look for employment are great, but we're in the same field. I wanted to be in the same field as Stephen, so I reached out and I said, hey, man, can you help me out? So, Stephen, can you kind of walk me through what that was like helping someone else from your end, and then also back up, who did you reach out to in your network for help when you were doing that a year earlier?
Sure. Yeah. No. It's the military network, the connections that you make while in service that don't end with your time when your time in service ends, whether it be by retirement, as you and I did, Mark, or just your ETS, or however you get out of the military. Those people that you meet who've gone on before you into life post-military are valuable. And as you said, we were connected. We'd known each other through the similar jobs we had at the same time. And then when I got out of the Army, we were connected through social media and things. You saw me and you reached out to me, which is great because it's exactly what I did in the couple of years before I retired. There's a lot of people who I had looked up to while I was in the military, and they were extremely helpful to me in a variety of ways in the tactical business of service. And they retired or otherwise gotten out in the months and year or two before I did. And I reached out to them, hey, I'm getting out. It's time for me to go. What advice do you have for me? So when you reached out to me, the summer of 2018, summer 2018, if I remember right, it was just natural because it's exactly what I had done myself. And a lot of other people offered me a lot of information and counsel and advice. And so just a natural extension of the process that we all go through in our service and then our transition out of service. And then now here we are still doing it some years later, trying to help other veterans out as they negotiate their way through life post-military.
How does that old adage go? Each one teach one.
Exactly right. And I'm hoping to do more than one. So hopefully we're reaching I know we're reaching a lot of folks here today with this. So.
I sure hope we are, and the folks out there listening, we're doing this for you. So, so using that network and reaching out to folks like you and I both have and have worked on together in the past. That's eventually going to land you somewhere. You're going to find that right employment opportunity. Someone's going to say, hey, I've got a great job for you over here, or helps lead you to the right employment. But once that happens, a lot of veterans find themselves kind of frustrated or maybe like they don't feel like they're in the right place. And I know a lot of folks they last maybe a year, 2 years in their first job out of the military, and they realize they need to do something else. And you kind of went through a similar experience. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So back to my network before I left the military, a gentleman who, again, another gentleman who I'd never met before in my life to this day, hadn't, but someone I know connected me with him in the months before I retired from the Army in 2017. He very graciously gave me about an hour of his time on the phone, and we talked. He just gave me a lot of great information. One of the things he told me was, Miller, don't let your first job, don't force your first job out of the Army to be your last job. Don't, everybody thinks they're going to get their career set, on their first time out of the military. That happens for some, but don't force it. So when I left the military, I got a great job doing basically what I did in the Army for a community college here in the western suburbs of Chicago. And it was a perfect job. It was really just a natural extension of what I wanted to do. But I found myself a couple years in, so this was, I guess early last year, and there are probably a lot of reasons for it, pandemic and a lot of changes and things involved in it. But I found myself just kind of itchy, just kind of frustrated, and I still loved the job, loved the work, loved everything I did, but it felt, I was unsettled. So I got to thinking back to that conversation I had with that gentleman year and a half or so, or I'm sorry, 4 years earlier. So don't force your first job out of the military to be your last job. Be okay with transitions after that. And so that's what I did. So I started looking around for other things, and managed to get a job at the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I do much the same thing I did for the college, which is what I did in the Army, here at the VA Medical Center in Chicago. And so yeah, I would extend the advice that gentleman gave me some years ago to anyone listening to this. If you're in the process of transitioning out of the military by whatever means, don't force yourself into thinking the first job you get has to be your last job. Be okay with further transitions. Be comfortable with that going in, and go forward with that. Because I got to, when I was thinking about my time at the college I was at, and get a great job. I loved every bit of it. I got to look around, and a bunch of my friends and mentors who had retired plus or minus 6 months or so around the time I retired in 2017, they were on their second jobs out of the Army. And they've moved from place to place and gone to the places. I thought, well, this is just a natural thing. If those of us who are in the military for any period of time who move around a lot, it feels natural. So be okay with your first job out of the military being a stepping stone to something else. That's always my advice to anyone. Be okay with more change.
So that quote there, the guy who told you, Miller, don't let your first job out of the Army be your last. I think that is really sound advice. Also, the fact that he addressed you as Miller, I should put the disclaimer out there that as well as we do know each other, and despite some folks having told me we look a little bit alike, we, to our knowledge, are not related.
Same home state and all, but yeah, no blood connection that we know of.
Yeah, just a lot of coincidences. Both grew up a few hours from each other in Illinois. We commanded mobile public affairs detachments at the same time, and then ended up supporting operations in Eastern Europe at the same time. So back to that, back to that advice about not letting your first job be your last. A lot of our listeners and viewers, might already be on their second or third. So what advice would you give to folks out there who might be in that job that isn't quite right for them? How to go about finding the right career for them. Maybe they're in a good job and they're going to be there for 2-3 more years, but what path would you say to kind of look and determine, is this where I belong, or how can I find where I do belong?
That's an interesting question, one that I don't know if I'm qualified to answer, but I was listening to this podcast recently. I listened to one from a few episodes ago with Lieutenant Colonel Olivia Nunn, who our paths have crossed a lot over the years. She talked about her tribe. You got to find your tribe, and that will feel right and fit when you know it. And it's, I have all people know. Sometimes when you're in the process of trying to find that, you're in a job that you love, or maybe you don't love. You love parts of it. You love the people you work with. You love the work you do. There's a lot of things that go into this fit Um, and that fit is different. I'm telling you, that fit is different for everybody. So any veteran, as you mentioned, who's I don't know, veteran has been out for whatever number of years, whether it's a year, 3 years, 5, 10, whatever it is. If you're unsettled in your job for whatever reason, and maybe it's pay, maybe you got great pay, you don't like the commute or whatever it is. There's a lot of things that go into that, and be okay with most military folks. We're pretty comfortable with ambiguity and complexity. This, no matter what your rank is, if you've been in the military for any length of time at all, you've had complexity and ambiguity in your work and in your life. It doesn't always. That's frequently the case in the civilian world. So be okay with that, and take every opportunity you can to explore other things. I was talking to my wife just recently, virtually, and it was in the last couple of days, about transitions and things, and looking at my next act or event, because my wife's also launching a new career for herself, and we were talking about what does it mean to have done something for any period of time in the military and come to realize I just don't want to do that anymore. As Mark, you and I were both fortunate to be public affairs officers, and I love it. But what does it feel like to come to realize, as great as it's been, I may not want to do this anymore, or at least not for now. So be comfortable with those feelings and those questions, and be able to internalize and process them, and come to your own conclusion. Because it's my path is certainly mine, and I would not force that upon anybody else. But I would always recommend people to, and Mark, you and I had these, I'm sure we had these conversations with soldiers we commanded. Is it time for you to get out? Yes or no? What's your plan? You don't have to know the destination, but you gotta have a plan. So I always tell people, even now, have a plan. So my wife and I were out walking the dog last night, and exploring, thinking about some other opportunities. And she says, you of all people always have a plan. You may not know where you're going, but you got a route. And so have that plan, that pathway to the next step, and be comfortable with the ambiguity, and not knowing exactly where you're going. And I believe most veterans are probably pretty okay with that. Just embrace it in your post-military life.
Yeah, it sounds like a deliberate way to go about it too. Try other things, be open-minded, then have a plan, then decide to go execute that plan. That's exactly how we were trained. I also love what you brought up about that's the advice we gave our soldiers, and then we get out, we need to give ourselves that advice. And I think this full circles back to the networking, because now the rank's off. Now we're not in a military structure anymore, and here we are still mentoring each other, mentoring others. And so how do you relate to saying, or really not relate, but what advice would you give with soldiers of all ranks to say, one, don't be afraid to reach out, but also there's some time frames in there where some folks you haven't talked to in maybe 2, 3, 4 years. What's your reaction personally, and what do you surmise others are going to be if you try to go back to that, I need mentoring, or perhaps I can help someone else? What are you going to do if the phone rings and someone's on the other end who you haven't talked to in maybe 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I would relish the opportunity to talk to anybody. If anybody who I've commanded, served with, whatever, reach out to me, because it does happen on occasion. It's a small moment. I kid you not, Mark. I was on LinkedIn just recently, just scrolling through. Wasn't doing anything. I haven't posted on my LinkedIn for quite some time myself. But I saw a post. Actually, wasn't even a post. It was a comment from my first battery commander. So this was 99. Okay, so I have not. He left command, I think in 2000. But I haven't seen him in over 20 years. I know he's on LinkedIn. He's left the military long before I. We haven't even said that close. But he gave me a book when he left command. He gave all of the lieutenants in the battery a book. You're probably familiar with it, Once an Eagle. And so there was a comment on there on LinkedIn about somebody else had posted something about that book, and John had commented on that post, and I saw his comment. I said, I still have my copy of that book. I literally taught. I taught at West Point for a while, and I taught out of that same book that he gave me 20 years earlier. And then here I am, just last week, 4 years after my retirement, 10 or more years after his, and talking about him as a role model and a mentor to me, and giving me that book that he wrote a little note in. I still have to this day. And he began a conversation on LinkedIn. He and I talking about a few things here and there, and just catching up. So those connections last. Don't be afraid. Never be afraid to reach out to someone from years ago. I'm not. It lifted my soul just this week when I saw that post from him about that book, and just the opportunity to connect, even if just for a few minutes over the course of a day or two, over some LinkedIn messages. And yeah, I mean, anybody, whether you're in the military now or out, do not be afraid to reach out to someone from the past, whether it was a year ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. Connect with the folks. They may not remember you. I can't claim to remember everybody I served with, but that's okay. The connections are still matter.
I can't agree with you enough, and I can second that to say when I get a call, not if, when, it happens, yeah. You get that call from someone you haven't heard from forever. It's great. It's great to catch up, find out what other folks are doing, kind of fill in the gaps between the last time and now. And I know we're talking in terms of employment, but the same that same argument, reach out to those folks you haven't heard from in a while, be responsive when they reach out to you. Same argument when we talk about mental health, that that's really good for us to connect with folks from our past and remember good and bad times together, and that we didn't go through that alone, and whatever you're going through now, you're not alone.
That's it. Yeah, and that's I work at Veterans Affairs. You work for Nation's Finest, a veterans organization. These connections that are made by the organizations that we work for and represent matter. And so connect with someone for employment. Yes, these are great networking opportunities for employment, but they're great for your health, your mental health, and just the strength that comes from just hearing folks, whether it's just listening to this podcast. I really enjoyed the podcast I was doing this week. It was great hearing Olivia on the air again, and hear what she's doing and things. I've stayed connected on social media. She's great. These connections are great, and they're important, and they're healthy.
And we all have them, whether you think you do or not. You've got connections from your time in the military. You might have to look someone up, but those connections are there. You just have to reach out. So as we wrap up here, Stephen, if you could just kind of, in a nutshell, what advice would you give to folks that are out there, either not currently employed, on the hunt, or veterans that know maybe I'm not where I should be? What would be your overall kind of overarching advice for those folks?
To not be afraid to try something even different. There's something to be said for the institutionalization that comes from being in the military. We all do our job. We stay in our job. The old saying, "Stay in your lane." When you're out of the military, you have the opportunity to have a different lane, to go to a different lane, or to expand your lane, have a big lane. And so, if you're not working, there's a lot of that. Your organization, Nation's Finest, and the VA, a lot of folks helping to solve that problem. But don't be afraid to jump into something different. If you're doing something that you're not comfortable with, that you like, whatever, don't care about, don't be afraid to do something different, because you've got it in you. You absolutely have it in you. You've done hard things before, and so don't be afraid to do those hard things again, and do those hard things continuously, because it pays off.
What great advice. You've done hard things before. Don't be afraid to do it again. And you did it for your country before. Do it for yourself now.
Do it for you and do it for your family, man.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's a great note to leave it on. Stephen, thank you again so much for joining us today, sharing your insights and advice.
Yep. No, appreciate it, Mark. It's great to see you. And it was a great opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you who joined us today. We will be back next week discussing issues relevant to veterans and those who care about them. Again, if you or a veteran you know needs help, or if you'd like to make a donation, please visit nationsfinest.org or call 833-468-9676. Again, that's nationsfinest.org at 833-468-9676. Thank you again for joining us today. And as always, carry on.